Okay, you're live now.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the March 9th, 2023 regular meeting of the City of Annapolis Financial Advisory Commission. We have with us Commission Vice Chair Bob Burden and Commission members Patrick Bannon, Perry Hepworth, and Meehan, and I'm Chair Fred Sussman. We have with us Alderman Ross Arnett, Alderwoman Ellie Tierney, Finance Director Jody Dickinson, Kim Moronsky from Finance Department, and Madeline Horrell from City of Annapolis TV. I think that covers everybody. So welcome, and I hope you all have been well. I sent out an agenda, so I hope you all had an opportunity to review it. Any revisions or corrections or suggestions for the agenda? If not, entertain a motion to approve the agenda as distributed.
So
Motion
moved.
made by Bob Burden, seconded by somebody, Ed Meehan. Ed Meehan. Got to be a little faster, Perry. All in favor of approving the agenda as presented, signify by saying aye or raising your right hand. Opposed? Unanimously approved. Next, I distributed minutes from our January 12th, 2023 meeting. I hope you all had an opportunity to review them. Any comments, questions, revisions? Hearing none, or seeing no indication that anybody has any, I'll entertain a motion to approve as presented. Motion made by Bob Burden, seconded by somebody, Perry Hepworth. You got it that time, Perry. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, raise your right hand or signify by saying aye. Opposed? Approved unanimously. We have several reports, but what I'm going to move around the agenda a little bit. Alderwoman Tierney asked if she could go early to talk about Ordinance 02-23, which she has sponsored. She has a commitment elsewhere at 9 o'clock, so she needs to leave by 8:45. Happy to accommodate. I sent out the draft ordinance or the ordinance as introduced with the meeting materials, and this deals with the budget process and collective bargaining agreements. So, Alderwoman Tierney, let me turn it over to you, and we'll hold off on any questions until Alderwoman Tierney is finished with a little presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for accommodating me, and I will watch this meeting on tape because you really do have a full agenda. Let me just talk about the genesis of this ordinance. I know Alderman Arnett has already heard this, but just my background in building is the first thing I do is I look at specifications to build a building and consequently, estimate or whatever. And I had the same approach when I became finance chair. First thing I did was look at the respective codes and see what they said. And I sat down with the city manager at the time and the finance director and noticed that there were some things that we didn't do anymore. But I waited until the full year of the budget process to see what else would need to be addressed in any sort of revision to the code specific to the budget process. And two things basically was in the background too is that I did have an initial meeting specific to the collective bargaining process with, I think there were about 9 of us on a Zoom call. Alderman Arnett was there and representative from the law office and Trish talking about the collective bargaining process and address my concern, which I found was it was a learning process for me. And also I got input from the law office on definitions that needed to be included. And then ultimately, after a couple of months, after a final draft, I sat down with Director Dickinson and said, okay, what does our budget do now? And the objective here is, as I mentioned before, like in specifications, is to have some longevity with the code. Thousands of years from now, Jody will be finance director, but it's the objective always is to somebody to pick up the code and understand it. And the code was not really in that shape. And then also the budget has been done differently, probably the last 5 years or so. And so it was time to sort of codify that process. So specific to the collective bargaining, it was a learning curve for me because there was language in the collective bargaining session, and it specifically read that when the parties reach agreement, they shall prepare a written memo, blah, blah, blah. Key sentence here: to have the results of any agreement considered by the city council, that agreement must conform to the city's fiscal year or years and be submitted to the mayor by the third Monday of March, so as to allow the financial impact of any negotiations to be included in the mayor's annual budget submission under 6.16.010. Two things there. There was a conflict with this language and the respective language in 6.1601, but the most important thing is that this is not doable. Every year, collective bargaining is a different way, shape, or form. We're either in the process of negotiating for that year, or we have a negotiated agreement that will carry over. There's different scenarios. From my perspective, I thought, well, isn't it in the city's best interest to get that number, ahead of our budget process, to lock it in, et cetera. And the truth of the matter is that, very simply, we don't know what we're negotiating until we know what we're negotiating. We need to know. The budget process, after the mayor's budget is introduced, it goes through amendments. Last year was a specific example where the emphasis was on adding to police. So there is this process, and the give and take with the union representation is really contingent on how much money we have in the budget, and we really don't know that until the amendment process, if you will. So we could not, having that absolute date in the code, unfortunately, isn't applicable every year. So what do we do? And this was a suggestion by my colleague, Alderman Savage, that said that the mayor's budget has to have that financial impact as best as we know it. And that is what we sort of did last year, and Director Dickinson can chime in there. We knew that there was going to be some impact on the public safety representation. So she had her best estimate on what that is, being knowledgeable of that, and carried that number in the mayor's budget. The compromise, if you will, in not having that number, that actual agreed negotiated number, is to get updates during the process. And the objective of the revision is, let's see what the language says here in 3.3. Okay, this if you look on page, I should probably go over the written language here. So if you turn to the ordinance, the first chunk is the respective revision in the collective bargaining 3.32 under Title III Human Resources, and Trish was very important to have her understanding and agreement with this language as well. We did have to revise the definition of collective bargaining. And we also, the most key definition here that we included is financial impact. The financial impact, and this is what we're asking for in the mayor's budget. Financial impact means a calculation of the expected expenditures associated with any collective bargaining agreement. Good faith was not defined. Good faith means that each party shall keep the other informed on all matters within the scope of the representation and give reasonable written notice of any action to be taken. So what we did on page 3 is basically strike out the original, the existing language and simplify it. That is one of the objectives of the Office of Law, is in any code revision, whatever title it is to simplify it. And this basically says that this, I'm on the bottom of page 3, city manager shall act as the city's primary representative to conduct the negotiations. And 2, upon recognition, the city shall have the duty through appropriate officials or their reps to negotiate collectively. That's just giving the authority. We always had that. And leaving it open to the respective city employees that are involved in the negotiations. And generic language about all other applicable laws. This is important too. Federal, state, or city law shall prevail if the collective bargaining agreement between the city and the employee conflicts or is inconsistent with federal, state, or city law. And this is important because a little bit of background here. When we had the existing code had the date. It had a date. As I previously said, it had an absolute date that the collective bargaining agreement should be done. If that date was left and the collective bargaining was not done, in researching every other jurisdiction, comparable that had that language, you have to have consequences. And the consequences are that you go into arbitration, and it's serious. You haven't met the date, and therefore these are the consequences. And that's in county law had that, and some state law, et cetera. In a meeting with the respective parties, human resource, finance, office of law, it was decided that that was not in the city's best interest. And that's the key thing here is I never really got through the budget process through all of this discussion about, where's the union agreement? Where's the union agreement? Is like, what is in the city's best interest? Tell me what, that's what we need to put in the code. And what I learned in this process, that it is in the city's best interest to, if the negotiations need to continue through the budget process, then so be it. But again, the compromise is in section B here. The parties shall begin negotiations by November 1st of the year before the collective bargaining agreement expires. And the city manager or their designee shall provide at least one update on negotiating progress to the finance committee. And so that is as I don't know what your reaction to this is. At first I was thinking, this is sort of a weak compromise, but this makes sense that during the process, the finance committee in a closed session gets updates on the progress, what's going on, where, and that's a closed session, as it says in B. The briefing shall be in person during a closed session if negotiations are underway. And then again, to reiterate, the mayor's proposed budget shall include the projected financial impact of ongoing negotiations per the reference in 6.16. So we've then revised the collective bargaining section, that chunk, and then in Title VI, the respective language is married up with the collective bargaining session. And then this is where we, in the existing budget language, specifically on page 5, paragraph B, that is the budget shall be, the fund groups were not applicable. Well, some of them were not applicable anymore. Something here didn't make within this language about within each of the aforesaid categories, a portion of the estimated fund equity equivalent to 5%, blah, blah, blah. We don't do that. I'm not quite sure where that came from. And yeah, so that was all in paragraph form. And so that's replaced by the respective paragraph B, budget content. Very simple framework there. Paragraph A is the one that marries up to the collective bargaining language. But paragraph B just simply tells the budget content, complete financial plan for the fiscal year. And as you know, the budget is divided into funds. It's government fund format. So we itemize them here, which is the general fund, the off-street parking fund, transportation, watershed, refuse, water fund, and sewer fund, all the enterprise funds that we have. And then we did leave other funds because we do know that there have been some other, and there will be perhaps some other funds to monitor respective spending where we need to marry up the spending, the revenue with the spending, or earmark money coming into a specific purpose. And then the paragraph 3 is simple. It's language to say that it is a balanced budget. And then also, I know, to support a line item budget, this just says there is an itemization of any expenses available. And it as always will be on public record in the Office of Finance. So that is the summary of this. And if there are any questions, I can answer with help from, I don't know if Director Dickinson wants anything to add on the process or the end result of the draft.
Before we do that, Alderwoman, I'd like the record to reflect that Commission Member Cardillo arrived at 8:05.
Yeah.
And has heard just about all of your presentation. So thank you very much for your presentation. Let me just give 2 minutes of my own thought, and that is that I'm a little bit concerned that the process does not provide significant input or opportunity for information sharing with the FAC. There's after the mayor's budget is submitted, we've referred to the FAC for comment, but I would have hoped that in paragraph B, where it talks about the updates on the negotiation process that's being given to the Finance Committee, that also would have included the Financial Advisory Commission so that we understand what is going on through the process for when we are asked to review the final product before it's approved by the City Council. So that was, in my mind, something that was not adequately addressed. And the other thing I would note is that the mayor is supposed to provide at the first council meeting in April the proposed operating budget and the impact of any labor negotiations on the operating budget. And that's broken out separately. And then in paragraph, was it 8.2, the budget shall be referred to the Finance Committee and the Financial Advisory Commission, both of whom are to make any recommendations not later than the second Monday in May. That is a pretty quick turnaround, but if that's what it needs to be, that's what it needs to. And I'm not quite sure how we're being asked, and the Finance Committee is being asked to weigh in on the budget. Yet the impact of any labor negotiations on the operating budget is broken out separately as a separate item of information the mayor to provide. So it seemed to me that it ought to be clear that the finance committee and the FAC, when making recommendations, are considering not only the budget, but the impact of the labor negotiations on the operating budget. So those were the couple of comments that I had. And let me see if Director Dickinson has any other comment before I open it up to the commission members.
No, just, I was going to comment on the discussion of the funds and the changing of the budget content and the funds. The language was out of date, didn't incorporate all of our funds. And as opposed to listing all the funds we budget, because our policy is we budget every dollar that's going out of the city. We have several other funds in that category H. And we wouldn't want to list them all. We add some occasionally. We may close some down occasionally, but we needed to list the funds that we're budgeting for. And we need to note that we're setting a budget for all funds that are spending city dollars. So the other list was not up to date or did not incorporate all the funds we had. As far as I kind of wish somebody from the Office of Law was on right now, because I think that goes to your concerns about who gets the briefing of ongoing negotiations, because the negotiation process is very confidential. And I think their concern would be keeping that information limited to a very small group, and even the finance committee session has to be in closed session. So
Right.
They probably would want to comment on that and address your concerns there.
My feeling on that is that, we are, as a FAC, are being asked to weigh in to the same degree as the finance committee. We should be privy to the same information. And I would have absolutely no problem if it were a joint session with the finance committee and the FAC, or if it were a closed session of the FAC. That doesn't trouble me. What troubles me a little bit is information being held back from one of two bodies that is supposed to be making advisory recommendation to the mayor and city council. So,
Right.
okay, let me open it up to other commission members. Bob Burden.
Yes. First of all, thank you, Ellie, for, putting the time and effort into this. Very much appreciated. And reading through the proposed ordinance, first of all, as I understand it, I'm going to try to, put my thoughts together on this. At present within the code, the negotiating agreements or the agreements that are under negotiation must be submitted by the third Monday of March. Actually, the final agreed upon agreement, needs to, I think, be in place by then for the city council to review and weigh in as to whether that's acceptable to them or not. And that's being struck from the code. There was probably a reason that was put into the code back when it was adopted. But going to the question that you're trying to answer, what is in the city's best interest? And I think that question has been talked about for 2 or 3 years among the FAC with the administration. And the response that comes back, which is a response that, Jody very well articulated, is that these negotiations are confidential. Only a certain pre-select identified personnel are are involved in these negotiations. And there really shouldn't be any discussion about what is being negotiated in a public forum, if you will, during the negotiation process. Now, that said, that's been a reason why the fact has not been given more transparency, I guess, into what's going on so that we can render our advisory opinions in a manner that is what we would consider more helpful in offering guidance to the city. When we go down, though, and we see that on page 4 in paragraph B, subparagraph C, the mayor's proposed budget shall include the projected financial impact of ongoing negotiations. Well, in essence, as I perceive that, that is the city showing their hand in a public forum as to what, you know, the city's attempting to negotiate. And to me, that runs contrary to what at least I personally would consider to be in the city's best interest. You know, the two parties come together, each have their own needs and concerns and demands, and those are negotiated in a private setting. The finance committee and the FACT should have the opportunity to weigh in on that in an appropriate manner. But even before we have an opportunity to weigh in on that, all of a sudden with this subparagraph 3, at least the city's position is being discussed in a public forum as to what the projected financial impact of the ongoing negotiations may yield. And that just seems to run contrary to what, in my opinion, would be considered in the city's best interest. I've always been of the opinion that the firm deadline that was set in March was the purpose to create a beginning point, which was October, and an ending point, which was March, and give appropriate time within those bookends, if you will, for negotiations to occur and agreements to be reached, such that the city council and the FACT would have opportunity to weigh in prior to getting too far along in the budget process. If we remove that, then what we're doing, in my opinion, is we're giving the collective bargaining units license to extend this negotiating period on into, you know, the budget process for whatever advantages they may feel would be to their benefit and contrary to the benefit of the city in the negotiation process. We have this fear of arbitration hanging over our heads as a rationale for trying to get rid of this March deadline and kind of keep it a little open-ended as to when we reach agreement. But nonetheless, I would feel more comfortable if we had a solid beginning time and a solid ending time in which negotiations need to take place and which agreement needs to be reached. Within the confidential atmosphere that, you know, the city and the collective bargaining units require, and with the ability for the finance committee and the FACT to be able to weigh in periodically to provide guidance to the administration as to, you know, what at least our considered opinions would be in terms of the best interest of the city in this negotiation process. So those are kind of my thoughts there. I kind of think that this kind of leaves the negotiation agreement process open-ended, runs it into the budgetary process, makes it potentially more political in nature, and then the city council and the FACT are kind of dealing with something that may not be in the best interest of the city at the end, and trying to reach an agreement that is equally, hopefully, beneficial to both parties and not heavily weighted towards one party as opposed to the other. My thoughts.
Kelly,
Yeah, let me just speak very freely here. I agreed with you, Bob, initially when I approached this paragraph, maybe coming from my hardcore bidding mentality. I held a meeting with Alderman Arnett was there, a representative from Human Resource, Law Office, City Management, blah, 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 blah. And I said, I don't understand why we don't get that number. We need that number. If we don't get that number, it's to our disadvantage. The unions, due respect, are watching the budget process. We look like idiots. They know how much money, they see us give money to so-and-so, then they think that this is this and this is this. I mean, I totally agreed with you. I mean, that's what I said, it is the city council's wish that we get this number, da, 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 da. I look at the city manager and the law office and human resource and the director of finance to represent the city's best interests. And I was virtually told, or that's the wrong word. I was succinctly told a couple of things. Number one, it's not doable, which is probably a pretty real thing to do. That, there are different scenarios and that it could work either way. What if that number was more than we had to give? We don't, very simply, we don't know what we have until we have gone through the budget process through amendments. We don't know what that number really is. If you look at the timeline for the budget process, there's May 15th, there's a due date for budget amendments, and those are sometimes pretty significant. May 25th, we're still discussing amendments. So I came in with that same attitude, like, this doesn't make sense. Why don't we get that number ahead of time? And I very clearly heard that it really isn't in our best interest to get that number early, plus the fact that there are different scenarios, that we already have an agreement, it's a 4-year agreement or in the middle. I saw Ross shaking his head. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything, Alderman Arnett, because I think you were at that initial meeting as well. And so I'll let Alderman Arnett chime in.
You're muted, Russ.
I will, with the indulgence of the chair, but right now it's time for the committee members to speak. But believe me, I have some things to say if the audience gets time to speak.
Yeah, okay. We'll come back to you. So we want to hear what you have to say. Commission members, any comments, thoughts, other than Bob Burton, who eloquently laid out his issues?
Yeah, Fred, can I?
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand raised there. I see it now, but go ahead, Jim, and then I saw Ed Meehan.
Thank you. I have, the only thing I want to add is thank you for Bob's comments. I agree in total with everything. I have a question with regards to the timeline that's shown on page 5, paragraph A, section 2. It says that the Financial Advisory Commission make recommendations to the council by the second Monday in May. One of the things I had asked for a couple of years ago was a full timeline of the budget, and I think this works into that. But what I want to ask is, that would mean that we would get a budget presentation at our scheduled April meeting from the finance director. Jody, is that doable within your calendar if we're delivering this report?
Yeah, so we introduced the operating budget the first council meeting in April, and then we immediately began scheduling meetings with and I know that your meeting in April, I'm not sure what that date is, but it may even be earlier than the second Monday in April. But we have
Jody, our April meeting is The regular April meeting is April 13th.
Your meeting might be the Thursday before that, but please note that right after that meeting, we have a big work session where we invite the FAC, the Finance Committee, the council members, and we start going over what's in the budget in detail and start talking about this particular things that are in that budget. And then throughout April, we have continual public meetings with the departments to go over all their budget as well, and anybody can attend that. So, and we have no problem with if we needed to have some kind of separate meeting with the FAC to outline other issues, concerns, we could try to fit that in that April timeframe as well. So all this is public. There's a lot of presentations going on in April. And then how the FAC fits that into their deadline with their typical monthly meetings, you may have to meet on an interim basis. And I think that's what you have done in the past, if I'm not mistaken, Fred, had some special meetings at the end of April and the beginning of May to try to fit in your budget deliberations.
That is correct, Jody. We have had one or two special meetings in past years.
Yeah, for reference, resolution 59-22 was passed to set the schedule for the next fiscal year. I hope I can send that to you under separate cover, but that was approved, and the date for next year will be, or this year, is April 27th, which is a council work session for the capital budget, debt affordability, which is a key component, and other budget items, and that's the joint meeting with the FAC, April 27th. And then with that, April 27th and May 15th is the date for both the finance and the FAC to make recommendations.
Could somebody provide that schedule to us? I don't know that I've seen it or received it.
Yeah, for reference.
If I haven't, then I suspect other commission members haven't either.
I can send that to you, 59-22.
I'm sure Kim would be glad to do that as well. You said it was resolution, right? Resolution 59-22?
Yeah, Kim, if you could look up on Legistar Resolution 59-22. Yeah.
Okay, other comments from commission members? Ed Meehan.
Thanks, Fred. Just very briefly, I mean, first to compliment the Alderwoman for being thoughtful in this area. It's a pretty important area, and so it's nice to see that there is the effort to weigh in there and try to make the process work a little better. Then flipping secondarily, to echo a little bit of what's been said before is, I know this FAC wants to have a meaningful role in this regard, and what I really felt from this last year's experience was that the FAC gets involved late in the game, and so by getting involved so late in the game, it's a little hard to provide meaningful input. I appreciate the concern over confidentiality. I deal with confidential matters all the time. Many of us do. I would have to believe that there is an existing provision in the code, or one could certainly be implemented, that requires the members of the FAC to treat matters confidentially that are brought to us in a confidential manner. So I would just, advocate that if the mayor and city council believe that the FAC can have valuable input, it is best to give us an opportunity to get involved a little more upfront rather than at the tail end, where it's very limited what value we can provide. So I'm sort of echoing some of the themes that I heard from Bob and from Fred, and that we've gone through in prior meetings. So if there's a way for us to get some sort of briefing or sense of where the city may be contemplating going earlier in the process, for us to try to address that rather than only come in at the very end right now, I think that could be a very meaningful improvement to the process.
Bob, before I recognize you, I have a question for either the Alderwoman, Alderman, or Finance Director. And that is, this ordinance has been referred to the fact for comment. Anybody know the date by which those comments need to be returned to the city council?
It'll probably get on the agenda fairly soon. This is, it's been to the Rules Committee, and I'll talk about that when it's my turn, but it goes to Rules, it goes to the Finance Committee, and of course, the director, the chair of the Finance Committee is here, and it goes to you. So I think once you're through with this process, Rules is done. I think it'll be ready to go on to the city council agenda.
Yeah, Finance has reviewed.
Finance what?
Finance Committee reviewed and gave it a favorable.
So my question is, won't they wait for the facts comments before they put it back on the agenda, or would it move forward without?
That's a legal question. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Well, it should wait for the fact
I
comments.
would think so if it's been
but-
referred somewhere, but I don't know how that's handled.
But as we're getting ready to get into the thick of the budget process, I mean, you've already been in it, Director Dickinson, for a while now, but I would say timeliness is in order here.
Thank you. Bob Burton,
No, it's okay, I'll pass.
any other comments from or questions from anybody? Jody?
You're muted.
Sorry. I was making notes as some of the FAC members were making comments. So I just wanted to bring up, when you read that form, the section that's crossed out about the delivery date in March, et cetera, the Office of Law, and they would have to explain this to you, they said that does not read as a hard deadline for a final negotiated agreement. It talks about including the impact of ongoing negotiations, and in order to get into the mayor's budget, they have to be there by a certain date, but it does not require the finalization of the agreement by that date. I believe you're right in that that's meant to encourage it to move forward so we can get the financial impact into the budget, but it's not a hard deadline. The discussions around hard deadlines have been that setting a deadline by which unions at the other side of the table have to meet in order to get any increases or terms for the next year. Setting a date for them is not bargaining in good faith. It kind of takes away their power on the other side of the table to try to lock them into a box. So we can't set a hard date for finished negotiations. The question is, how do you get the financial impact into the budget so that it's reflected, and that the dollar amount that we put into the budget while we were in negotiations was at the time a total dollar amount only. It was one big dollar amount, and it did not say what's being reserved for fire, what's being reserved for police, what's being reserved for this group or this department. It was just a number that approximated the fiscal impact as of the date of those negotiations. So I feel it gives a number, but doesn't show our cards too much. And we go into our negotiations having an idea on what we want to provide. This year's negotiations, again, as you know, finished with more financial obligations, and we were able to work it through in the amendment process. If we ever had a situation where the budget was set and it didn't include all of the financial impact, then I think the council approves these labor agreements before they get finalized. So that would be the opportunity for the council to say, hey, wait, we don't have this budgeted, et cetera. So I think there's other mechanisms to catch not having any total financial impact in there that would stop it from moving forward or delaying a date of implementation or something like that. And I kind of wish we'd have law and HR here because these are not my areas of expertise, but I was just trying to give you some of the background of what we've talked about on those issues.
Yeah, that's
Thank you, Jody. Ellie, I'm looking at my clock and.
Oh, yeah,
it's about time for you to.
it is
Sure.
unfortunate because law and human resource both had representation at the committee reviews. So it is a law question. One specific law question I have is in those updates to the finance committee that are closed session. Is there an opportunity? Can the finance chair invite the FAC? I don't know the answer to that, but I did get definitely got the response from representatives of collective bargaining, human resource, and the law that it is a very confidential process. So yeah, I'm going to have to go. I apologize. I'll listen to this on tape. I look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the work you put into it, and we'll get back to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Ellie, I want to say I wish you could be here because you may not like some of my comments, but I will share them with you afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, I did watch Rules, so yes. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I have to go, and I will watch it.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bob, you had some more comments?
Yeah, and I would have liked to have the Office of Law here to be able to address this issue, Jody, that you raised, because, and I would assume you're referring to paragraph D on page 3 of the ordinance that was struck. And quite frankly, if that is how the Office of Law presented the position, then I would have some serious questions of the Office of Law. As I read that paragraph that was struck, it says the parties shall begin negotiations by October before the effective fiscal year begins. When the parties reach agreement, they shall prepare a written memorandum of such agreement and submit it to the City Council for its ratification or rejection. To have the results of any agreement considered by the City Council, that agreement must conform to the city's fiscal year or years and be submitted to the mayor by the 3rd Monday of March, so as to allow the financial impact of any negotiations to be included in the mayor's annual budget submission. To me, that reads like the final deal's done and it gets submitted by that deadline. Fred, we need to have the Office of Law weigh in on this because, quite frankly, I don't know where the Office of Law is coming if they portrayed to Jody and the administration that is not a hard deadline when everything needs to be completed and presented so that it can be included in the fiscal year. It reads to me like a pretty hard, firm deadline where negotiations have to be completed, results have to be known, and it has to be submitted by the 3rd Monday of March.
Bob, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but that is all language that's being taken out. And I don't know what is to be accomplished by, questioning the Office of Law about its interpretation of language that is going to be removed by this ordinance.
Well, my understanding is that the language is being removed because the Office of Law feels that it doesn't, have any justification or meaning or
I think that they're trying to clarify it, which is why they're taking out that section and trying to reword it in a workable way that makes sense. They felt it was confusing and not clear as to what it was trying to do. So that is not the purpose of that being struck. We are trying to clarify language that's confusing. And I think they would tell you that that is the purpose of taking that out and resetting it in another way.
But by taking it out, it's creating an open-ended negotiation process that can just drag on and on and on to the benefit of the collective bargaining units and to the disadvantage of the city. Quite preferably, if you're going to take that out, I would recommend that we go back to what the facts suggested earlier this year, is that if a negotiated agreement is not reached by a certain date and negotiations need to continue, okay, fine, but the results of that negotiation and the implementation of it will be delayed until the following fiscal year, when it can be appropriately, included in a budget document that the city and the FACT have all the information available to, be able to, provide their guidance.
And that was to my other comment about if you say, but you don't agree with the terms or come to an agreement by a certain date, you can't have any changes to your contract for the next year. That is not negotiating in good faith. And that's a Tricia issue. And I think that we should wait until HR and law are here to talk about it.
Okay, I agree with you on that. Let's wait till HR and law are here, and I will have some questions on that, Fred, because the negotiation process. Well, let me just say, from a business side, it doesn't make sense at all, and from my experience, and these type of issues in the private sector, and I don't know why it would be different in the public sector. So, it would be important that. We have law and HR in here so that we can, present our concerns.
Okay. Jody, or did I see somebody else's hand up? Patrick.
I like what Bob just said. If they can't negotiate by the deadline, keep it at the same level as it was last year. The federal government does that all the time. They call it a continuing resolution instead of passing a new budget. So, and I thought last time in our last meeting, the legal folks said that some of these figures are available, but some reason we're not getting them, or they're not sharing. I don't know if that would help us out. So that's it. So I think they should have the hard deadline, but if not, then keep it at the same level and move on to the next year. What they come up with.
Thank you for your comment, Patrick. Appreciate it. I think Ross, your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'd like to amplify a little bit on this dialogue, but then there's a whole nother section that I wanted to draw your attention to. By adding the section on page 2, the good faith section, which I think we do need to obviously negotiate in good faith, but it's exacerbating the catch-22 that has always existed. We promised the unions that we're going to give them all the information that we have in order for them to inform their development of their request for the department. And we can't give it to them before we have it, which always crowds in on the deadline. I do question, and I will question when we talk about it at the council. It seems to me that we've moved it from October on page 4, the time that people need to start negotiating from October to November. I would much rather move it back further, maybe even a year back, because we know how long union negotiations take. But I would point out, November 1st is a hard deadline. So are we getting double talk from the Office of Law? We can have a hard deadline here, but we can't have a hard deadline elsewhere. I think we really do need to hear from them about that. But I think it has always been the case. If you look at page 4, line 28, we do tell them what our placeholder is. And I would think that anybody who's interested in bargaining in their self-interest would say, that's my floor. I mean, why would you do anything any different? And so I think this process is inherently unfair, but that's all I'll say on that. I do want to, if you'll, unless you want to ask me more questions about that, I did want to point out something else in this document. You're muted.
Anybody have any questions for Alderman Arnett on his comments thus far? Seeing none, go ahead, Alderman.
So at the Rules Committee, I specifically asked if this new simplified version, which I do think is easier to read, captured everything that was in the old code, and I was told yes. I will hold this document up because three of us, Fred, Bob, and I, remember why the Blue Ribbon Commission was formed. And I will direct your attention now to page 5, starting at around line 10, where we have the reference in code about the required reserves. And we all know that this commission was formed because we were on the verge of bankruptcy. And part of that is because the required reserve rules were violated. Now, maybe Director Dickinson can point to me where this shows up again in the simplified code, but I think that's one of those things that is so fundamental. It is seared into my hide that we have to make sure that we have codified these reserves. And if it's taken out of here and it's showing up someplace else in the code, that's something I'd like to know about. But those reserve requirements, I do believe, need to be hard coded. And I will tell you, we just recently had an adventure on a different front. The new attorney, Linda Schuett, hired by the Office of Law to work on code, said that things like this should be in code, not in rules and regulations. All of these really fundamental things need to be where you can go to one place to find them. And I will admit it might be my failing. I can't find it, but I think those reserves are a very important thing to have in the code.
Thank you, Alderman Arnett. Appreciate you bringing that to our attention and refreshing my recollection as to some of the discussions we had in the Blue Ribbon Commission many years ago.
I just would make one other quick point. I understand this whole confidentiality issue, but I will remind you that Alderwoman Finlayson and I participated in the union negotiations. We participated for about 14 months in the IBB process, and somehow we didn't violate a confidence. And I think that there is an accommodation that could be made. Maybe it's a subset of the fact who are sworn to confidentiality to be involved much earlier and to bring your input to the process. I just don't buy that argument. And I think it is one of the fundamental reasons why we set up this external oversight body, which I personally believe has been so important to the city. And I'm not even sure that it's the Office of Law that's resisting that, but I do think that it's something that could be questioned. We have hard evidence that it has occurred before, and I think that we can swear people to, strict observance of confidentiality and have them participate earlier in the process. And that's really the only way I think the fact can even contribute. You'll get it at the last minute, just like the city council gets it at the last minute with really no time to analyze things. So I strongly question that whole argument of excluding the fact. And I have always questioned that.
Thank you, Alderman. Other questions or comments? Bob Burden.
Yeah, I just want to remind our fellow commissioners, as well as, our guests that are here, is that when, and certainly Jody can attest to this, that when you look at the city's budget, a large percentage of it does involve labor cost and benefits and so forth, which are a direct outgrowth of the collective bargaining agreement negotiation processes. And that is why this is such a topic of specific interest to the fact in fulfilling our advisory capacity and the guidance that we can offer to the administration, absent our ability to be able to be appropriately informed as to, what takes place within this process and be able to offer the accuracy of the guidance that would be important to it. We're kind of rendered, somewhat, neutral in the sense of being able to offer quality guidance on an aspect of the budget that, creates the majority of the expenditures by far, each year. So that's why, in my opinion, the fact is so keen on, engaging in this negotiation process. Not only that, I mean, Fred and I have been involved with the fact for many, many years, and I can just speak for myself that I think that in the agreements that I have seen between the city and the collective bargaining units over the last 15 years, I think the city has not, received or has not been able to, receive the appropriate advantages and benefits that it should be able to receive in the negotiation process. Okay, in other words, the city, I think, has not been able to fully, represent, maybe represent's not the right word. Okay, and the long and short of it, the city's got the short end of the stick on these negotiations over the last 15. The agreements that I've seen, the city has ended up continually in the hole, and this is a systemic problem. And each year that goes by, we just dig deeper and deeper. And I think at some point the city has to take a more firmer stance in the negotiation process and recognize that, the taxpayers' dollars aren't just there to, give the collective bargaining units everything they want. There are other needs and core responsibilities that the city has to meet. Collective bargaining units being one of many, not the only one. So that's all I got to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. All right, any other comments or questions? We've been asked to make a recommendation on this particular ordinance. I'm hearing from my fellow commissioners concern about a number of provisions, but also several of you have suggested that we should have input from the Office of Law and possibly personnel. What's your feeling as to whether we have enough information based on the discussion today to make a recommendation to the city council, or whether we want to defer any action until perhaps we can get additional input from Office of Law and personnel at our next meeting?
What's the timeline, Fred, that we're working with here? When's the city going to take this up, Ross?
I don't know. I asked that question earlier, and Art said Rules has already considered it. Ellie said that Finance had considered it, or just about ready to make its recommendation, and people are probably waiting for us. And I haven't been given any hard deadline or even a suggestion. I just received a referral, and there's nothing in the referral giving me any indication or giving us any indication as to the time frame within which, we need to respond to have our input considered as part of the legislative process.
Fred, I would prefer that we have the Office of Law and HR available to the fact for us to be able to render, an advisory opinion of substance. I mean, apparently, some of the opinions coming out of the Office of Law and HR are guiding the administration on, and perhaps the Finance Committee on some of the language that is being struck from the current ordinance and why it should be struck, and on certain language that's being added. And I think that our discussion here this morning has indicated that at least there are some of us who are scratching our heads as to, some of the rationale that is being put forth for, revising the ordinance from the Office of Law and HR. And in all fairness to them and to the fact, they should be available to the fact for us to pose our questions and get a better understanding as to, why they are providing the guidance they are to the administration and to the Finance Committee.
Okay. Ed Meehan.
Yeah, Fred, just very briefly, I think this question is in two categories. One, there's the question about hard deadlines, and can they be put into the ordinance? Does that create a legal problem with good faith negotiation? I can see that is a topic on which the Office of Law and HR may wish to weigh in, and we may find their views informative on that question. But there's a second question where I don't think we need any further input from anybody. And that is, what is the role of the fact? And as I see it and really understood it from this past year's experience, the role of the fact is to have almost no input of any value in the way it is currently being handled, because we are brought in so late in the game. This past time we had a number of recommendations and observations, and as a practical matter there was little to nothing that could be done. So I don't think we need any further input from the Office of Law. We know how it works, and my view is obviously very strongly that we should be brought in sooner. I don't see any concern about confidentiality. I think that we would be bound to it. And if that needs to be cleaned up and made more explicit, then absolutely the Office of Law can draft some language to reinforce. But I think we need to be brought in earlier so that we can provide as much value as we can. And as I understood it, that is one of the central functions of this commission. And I think at this point, because of the way it's moved forward, perhaps due to the confidentiality concerns, we're not really in a position where we're implementing what we have been asked to do. So I don't think we need further legal input on that. I think we just need to take a position that we want to play the role that I think is already laid out, which is to get us in sooner. And we can obviously discuss whatever ways we need to proceed in a confidential manner and to protect the integrity of the negotiations. There's no quibble on that. So that's where I would see it.
Thank you, Ed. I have mixed feelings about it. I don't want to put us in a position where if we delay too long, the city council will take the matter back up without our recommendation. I've heard some good, solid comment today from commission members as to reservations about the language and about some of the concepts in here that I think probably could be transformed into a letter back to the city council without further guidance or advice from either HR or the Office of Law. Nothing to say the letter can't question the guidance or advice if we think that's necessary or appropriate, but I don't know that we are going to change minds on the other side of the table, even if we do bring them in to hear them out. So, you know, my thinking, and also we're getting into budget season, and our meeting on the 13th, I imagine, will be consumed with budget presentations and discussions, even if we don't have a meeting sooner. So I think I don't want to overburden the commission members with multiple special meetings. And I certainly don't want to have a special meeting just for this limited purpose. So my inclination would be to move forward with a recommendation, have a letter prepared, disseminated to the commission members for review, comment, revision, and then sent back to the to the city council. That's only my personal feeling, but if the group collectively would feel more comfortable getting input from HR and Office of Law, I certainly can live with that. So, let me hear, please, from commission members as to which way you would prefer to go. Jim, do I see you starting to talk? I can't tell.
No, it's just I don't want to take up everybody's time by saying I concur with your comments.
Okay.
It sounds like, Fred, just that if we go with the letter, that would probably expedite or be something that would happen sooner than, again, bringing in law personnel and then moving forward. Is that in accordance with what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm not sure, at least from my view of the world. I know Bob and I respectfully disagree on this, that much is to be accomplished other than hearing what I think we've already heard or understand from HR and personnel about their views on this, about the collective bargaining process, about confidentiality, about this issue about timing. I don't need to hear it again. I don't think we're going to change minds on that. And I don't think it's our role to change minds of other advisors to the city council and to city staff. So, yes, Jody.
Yeah, if this is the direction you go and you write up your comments, I wanted to just comment on the discussion about the reserves that were required in that one section about the budget process. Ross is right that we do have reserve requirements in the general fund that are much more stringent than that 5%. And those are in policy, and the policy is adopted by council via resolution. However, that policy doesn't include these other funds. And if there is a necessity to have some kind of reserve minimum for these other funds, that language didn't address all the funds. So we would need to have a more robust policy as far as fund balance reserves. And I would suggest that go along with the policy reserves that we have, the policies on reserves that we have that are adopted by resolution by council, and we couple it with that. So I just wanted to throw that in there while you're deciding on your comments.
Thank you, Jody. Bob.
Yeah, Fred, I'm okay if you want to go in that direction. The reason I'm advocating what I'm advocating is that I wanted to put as strong of an argument as possible before the administration, the city council, in support of our, perspective on this proposed ordinance. I just did not want to be in a position where we render an opinion and the Office of Law comes into a city council meeting and says, oh yeah, but the fact doesn't know what they're talking about. They don't understand the legal aspects. And they didn't give us an opportunity to address it to them directly. But if we can structure our recommendations such that that this is what has been conveyed to us, as the rationale for, what Office of Law and HR is recommending, and this is where we have disagreement with them on it. And hopefully that will give the city council reason for pause to want to explore this further, which would give us the opportunity to be able to weigh in with any additional rationale that we feel would be important to, help them as they work through this. I think that taking an ordinance of this nature and making the substantive changes that are being proposed that, will be memorialized in the city code going forward, I think we want to be sure that, what we set in motion here is, what is truly in the best interest of the city long term.
Other thoughts?
If we go that direction, is that an additional meeting that would be proposed, or in the following months?
If we go in which direction, Perry?
Asking law and personnel to come in and weigh in.
Well, that would require probably another meeting. I'm reluctant to say we'll do it at our April 13th meeting, because number one, that is about 5 weeks away, and I sense that the city council wants to move on this sooner than that. But also, as you heard from the earlier discussion, I think we will be consumed with the beginning of budget discussions at that meeting, and typically those type of discussions take an entire meeting. I don't know that we would have enough time during a regular meeting take up this issue again. So,
Yeah, Fred.
I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Yeah, Fred, why don't we just go ahead and draft a recommendation? Let's circulate it among us and see what we come up with, okay?
Okay.
Yep, agreed.
All right. So let me, and I think the way we've done it before is somebody would draft a proposed letter. And I think the last one, Bob, you and Ed collaborated on and sent it to me for review, and we're happy with it. We sent it out to the other commission members for concurrence. And then we did not have a special meeting to formally approve it. It was the understanding at the meeting in which that preparation of that letter was authorized that upon concurrence by email from the commission members, it would then be distributed to the city council. And I think that is an efficient way to proceed. Does anybody have any objection to that? Okay. So let's say by consensus, that's the agreement of the commission to proceed in that fashion. Bob, were you making notes or anything?
Yes, I've been making notes. Mhm.
I hate to ask, but do you have the time and inclination to put together a draft?
Yeah, I think the way that both Ed and I worked on it before, and I think Ed, I put it together and then you reviewed it, you polished it up.
Sure. Yeah, that's all fine. That's all fine with me. We worked well together.
We do.
I really, really appreciate you guys owning up to that. I'm sorry. I really, really appreciate you commission members owning up to that. Let's be gender neutral here. Give me an idea as to when, by when you think you can get me a draft.
What's today? Today's
Today is
Thursday. Why don't I work on something here in the next couple of days and get something to you by the end of this weekend? And, maybe
Sounds good.
Saturday or Sunday, and then you can go ahead and review it and, and then, we can connect and get something back to Fred here that he can review and then pass on to the other commission members.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. That works for me. Perfectly fine.
Okay.
Great. All right. Any objections from commission members to that process? Hearing none, so determined by consensus. I see it's already 9:20. I figured this would take a while, but did not anticipate it would take as long as it did. So we'll kind of move along. Jody, anything from Finance Department generally? We'll take just a couple minutes in a minute, talk about the audit of results, but anything general from Finance Department?
General, no, we're working on various things, including the budget for 24. Trying to wrap up the staffing. I have some backfilling of positions to do now. And we paid off the sub debt. So from the P3, so that's an accomplishment. And that's the main things that we're working on within the office, besides some daily operational changes. So
Okay, great. Jim, anything from Audit Committee? And we are going to talk about the audit results briefly in a minute.
We added a new audit committee member at the last meeting. So one citizen member, 2 vacancies remain.
Okay. Next, nothing on city manager is out of town, so he does not have a report today. Nothing today on unfinished business. We'll come back to that next time. New business, the FY22 audit results. Jody, I distributed the materials. There were 4 attachments in my email that dealt with the FY22 audit results. And I asked Jody if she would just take a couple minutes to highlight whatever she thinks is appropriate. And I would just note that it was a pretty darn good audit result. It was just one or two, I consider be relatively minor things that were pointed out by the auditors, but I'll let Jody talk about that.
Yeah, Fred, before Jody goes into that, there was one issue under Spending Affordability Committee that I would like to address before we conclude the meeting, and that we could do that after Jody gives her report, if that works for you.
Okay, we'll come back to that, Bob,
Thank you.
after I hear from Jody on the audit. Go ahead, Jody.
all right, so in the email that you received with the attachments, you would have gotten the financial statement itself, which is the ACFR. And that includes an audit opinion from our auditors. It is a clean opinion. You got what's called the governance letter, which is the letter that the auditors are required to send to the governing body. The audit committee and the council are the recipients of that, and we will be reviewing all of this with the audit committee at their next meeting. It's a week from Monday, so if you want to tune into that, the auditors will be giving their presentation, and then we'll be giving some more information about the financial results for 22, and then answering questions to the audit committee. So I'm sure that will be a pretty robust discussion of 22 results. You also got a management letter that talks about non-critical recommendations for improvements. And the only thing in the management letter was the auditor's reminder that in this fiscal year, we have to implement a new statement from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board that addresses valuing your obligations for software that you're using. Typically, a lot of that is done on a year-by-year expense basis, and there's some argument that that's a long-term obligation of sorts. So how we're going to record those will be changing a bit. That's something we have to implement this year. The last thing that you received was a single audit report. And this is the first time in many, many years, maybe ever, that that's gone out at the same time as the ACFR. The auditors handled it that way, that we are very appreciative that they did their testing for that at the same time that they did their testing for the audit, got them out at the same time. The single audit, they tested a few of our major programs. They didn't have any issues with compliance with the grants themselves. Within the single audit, they've attached the internal control opinion, and that opinion is usually a separate document, but they it's their practice to attach it to the single audit. So you'll find that in there, and the internal control opinion addresses the quality of the city's internal controls. And that is where you will find the material weakness that Chairman Sussman alluded to. When we were finishing, near the end of the audit, they asked about our construction work in progress. That's an asset that's on the balance sheet that was supposed to represent construction projects in process that before they're ready to be depreciated. And so they asked what's in there. We did some investigation, and there were a lot of old things that were in there that had never been removed. And that is, while you're constructing a project, it gets recorded as construction in progress. And then when it's finished, it gets recorded as a finished asset, and you start depreciating it. And there were some old entries that had gone in there that did not get cleared when the fixed asset was added. So those were significant adjustments. I think you'll see the dollar amounts are in there. So I ask you to take a closer look at that. They were material, and then we've cleaned that out to represent, so that now what's in the statements represents what's really in process, construction work in progress as of June 30, 22. So with a lot of hard work, I have to give kudos to Julie Donnelly, who did all the legwork on investigating what the old things that were in that balance, stemming from, I think we can go back as far as 2012. That's when our system was implemented, all the way through 2017. So, we can talk more about that at the audit committee. I don't know if anybody has any quick questions about it. But we cleaned it up. And since I've been here, the process has been things that are finished and being depreciated are taken off of work in progress. So those were some old things that we had in there that we should have cleared out.
You're on mute, Fred.
Thank you, Ross. I was just thanking Jody for an overall very positive audit report and the hard work that went into it, and the day-to-day work that she and her team do. Any questions for Jody about the annual audit report? Seeing none. Bob, I see that Mike Lyles, the city attorney, has joined us. Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and everybody on the call. Good to see from everybody.
Bob, why don't you?
Yeah, I'm here. Mhm.
Okay. Do you want to talk about whatever it was about the spending affordability issue? And then, if we have time, if it's the inclination of you and city attorney, we can pose to him a couple of the questions that you had as we were discussing ordinance 02-23.
Okay, yeah, the spending affordability, as we've reported in previous meetings and more recently, in sharing with the FACT members, I think that we pretty much have a model to work with spending affordability and how the city may adopt it. Certainly we have experience in the models that of the state's spending affordability function, as well as the county's spending affordability function. And particularly the county's spending affordability function, if the city were to engage in a spending affordability type of effort, there are many opportunities for the city, potential opportunities for the city and county to collaborate and fulfilling a spending affordability function here on the city level. The only difference between the county's spending affordability effort and the city's spending affordability effort perhaps may deal with the tax differential that the city has, and which is a certain amount that the city has paid to the county for certain services that the city benefits from that the county provides. And now that creates a dynamic that perhaps the county and the state and their spending affordability functions don't really have to address or deal with. However, the city would have to deal with that. During the course of the summer, both Fred and I had the opportunity to engage with some subject experts here that are local to the area, that have extensive experience in public finance, particularly on the county and the city level. And in that process, we also, came into the knowledge that there is an entity called FELS, which exists out of I think it's the Wharton School of Economics, is it, out of the University of Pennsylvania, that could potentially be engaged, that would address or look into, some of the dynamics and the systems under which the city operates that could potentially impact the quality of the spending affordability effort that we would have here in the city. And in engaging in this and looking at it over the summer, there was certainly a feeling on our part that it would be well worth our while to engage the FELS project in such an effort here. We've met with Mike Malinoff, and we've discussed this with the city manager, Mike Malinoff. There was an initial expression of interest there. We, as well as in continuing with the spending affordability effort, we are attempting to set up some additional meetings with Mike and with Jody on this. There are a few issues that need to be addressed on this, but nonetheless, I think this all comes down to where the city manager and the director of finance feel that these two endeavors could be of benefit to the city, or whether they could be of benefit to the city. Quite frankly, in my opinion, I think they would be extreme benefit and excellent pursuits to follow. But nonetheless, the city manager and the director of finance need to feel that would be a benefit to the work that they do in helping to move the city forward in a direction that would improve the sustainability, if you will, of our financial undertakings in the future for the city, as well as other issues. And so that's where we sit at this point. Jody, I know that you've asked for contact for FELS. And Fred, I may be speaking out of turn. If you want to, shut me down, please feel free to do so. But Jody, we have 3 subject experts that are local to the area that are exceptional in their understanding of public finance on both the county and the city level, who in many ways are very strong advocates of this FELS project. And the long-term benefits that could exist out of this, I think would be, very beneficial to the city. But these subject experts are an important part of this effort. And while we don't have the contacts for FELS, these subject experts do have experience with them and contacts with them. And quite frankly, I think if we were to move forward on this, these subject experts would be important participants in this. And it is my personal feeling that if there's a desire on your part and the city manager's part to want to explore FELS, that it be done in conjunction with these 3 subject experts in terms of making the appropriate contacts and setting up any appropriate dialogues that would need to take place to give you and the city manager, an understanding of what direction this may take. I think there's been some delay already, which I think has created some lost opportunity in terms of timing, to get something underway with Fells. But I do think that bringing Fells into this process, along with the spending affordability initiative that we're looking at, given, some of the, areas that, Fells could offer in creating a better spending affordability effort by looking at some of the systems, that we're working under would be a benefit. But nonetheless, whether we go with Fells or not, the spending affordability function is just pretty much straightforward. Jody, you know the issue on the county level and how it's handled. It can be handled here on the city level. There's opportunities for collaboration with the county on it. We can start making the phone calls and start getting that program in place. But at the end of the day, you and Mike have to buy into it. If you don't buy into it, fine, we'll just move on. If you do buy into it, I can speak on my behalf, and I think on Ed's that, we're ready to invest the time and effort into it. But I think any further delay, is just that delay in this. So, the
Well,
ball's
that's
in
why
your
we're
court.
asking for a way to get a hold of them, because there's no apparent way to, hey, here's where you call if you want to use the Fells Institute. So please provide the names of your contacts and the contact data, and we're willing, and that's why we're asking for the information.
Okay, well, we'll do it though, and we presented to Mike, the subject experts locally that we feel need to be a part of this contact effort.
I'm not aware of those experts, so I don't know who those are and how
Okay.
I can probably get a hold of them locally then.
Okay, well, I don't know what dialogue has taken place between you and Mike, and that's fine. That's between the two of you. But from my perspective, any dialogue that takes place with Fells would need to include these three subject experts, because they're the ones that have the experience with them and can guide all of us in this process. That's kind of where we sit on this. If you and Mike want to pursue talking with Fells without engaging these subject experts, then, from my perspective, I think that we'll just table this with Fells and just work on spending affordability and go forward from there. That's just kind of, where my thoughts are on this.
So I'm more than willing. I would appreciate any involvement of that kind and find out what's out there and who can help us with a more robust look at where the future of the city is as far as revenue sources, land use. We're working on a couple other elements there to try to, as you said, look forward and see what makes sense for the city. So I'm all in on that kind of thing. I think it's very useful and welcome any guidance. So send me the names, and then if they're local, I can probably find out how to get hold of them locally.
Okay, well, better than that, we'd like to arrange a meeting between you, Mike, Fred, myself, and these subject experts for a discussion before reaching out to Fells. Are you okay with that?
Yeah. I'm just,
Okay.
I don't know so I'm a little confused as to how it works. So I'm just trying to figure out how the three people relate to the Wharton School, if it's a Wharton School effort, if they support the effort or whatever, but I just need some background on how it works. So-
Well, that's why we need to get a meeting together of all of us, so you can understand that, Then the other question I have for you is, where do we sit from the administration standpoint on pursuing a spending affordability effort, other than having Ed and I go back and do additional research, on top of what we already done. I mean, Ed and I met with you at the beginning of this, and we seemed to feel that there was a definite interest in adopting a spending affordability function for the city of Annapolis. We issued an initial report on this. And now we're at the point, and then we were told, well, let's go back and look at other jurisdictions and counties. Well, to me, that's kind of the dog chasing the tail here. We already know what we have. We have very excellent examples on the county level and the state level. We have excellent opportunities for collaboration on the county level. This is something that, we don't need to delay any further if the administration will buy into a spending affordability function, which would give Ed and I the endorsement to be able to reach out to the county and start looking at the possibility of collaborative efforts and engaging some of the resources that are exceptional already and the services that they provide to the county and the state, and getting something set up here for the city. I mean, are you in favor of going forward with this or not? I mean,
Which?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, so
I have
Jody.
I have to intercede here.
No, wait a minute, please. Jody, we're volunteers on this committee here, on this commission. We're willing to commit the time and the effort to put a spending affordability function together for the city of Annapolis. But the feedback that I'm receiving is that there's some hesitancy here. In other words, not sure we want to commit yet. We need more research. We need more information. We need more this and that. In my opinion, we don't need any more of that. We know what we have. We know what works. You yourself come from the county. You know how the spending affordability function works and the potential that it could potentially have for the city if it's something that you feel would be a benefit to the city. We're being told by Mike that this is coming to your desk, okay? That he's going to rely upon your opinion and your recommendation as to whether these things should be pursued. Now, Mike's not here, to respond to this, but I've been involved in this since 2020 when we first introduced this. We're coming into the third year of this spending affordability effort, and it's sitting on my desk, tabled here, because quite frankly, I am not going to spend the time and the effort to do all this work if there's no desire on the part of the city itself to not want to, truly want to engage in this. So maybe I'm putting you on the spot, Jody. Maybe we need to talk offline. But the bottom line is,
Yes.
is that, we need to get something moving on this. And we need to get, we either need a yes to go forward or a no, we're not interested at this time, maybe later. Okay, fine. But, I just, I'm getting frustrated on this, because I see the benefit to it. But my opinion doesn't matter. It's whether the city administration sees the value of this. So I've spoken my piece. I'm sorry, but that's, that's where we got to go.
Fred, you're on mute.
Ross,
So I think we're conflating two very important issues. When you first started, Bob, I thought we were finally going to have the FAC recommend that we adopt the Towson University spending affordability model that both the state and the county use. I think that model can be easily adopted to reflect the city data, which the main difference is the heavy use, reliance on property tax at the city level. And I've long advocated that we adopt that model, that we need to contract with Towson and set that model up. And there'll be some expense to get that step down to the city level on the spending affordability. As you know, it's a combination of 5 different forecasts. The Towson's value additives, they make recommendations combining those forecasts. And I think we just, and I'll be happy to make a motion in the budget that we do put forth the money to contract with Towson. And of course, we want to collaborate with the county. The Fells is an entirely different thing, and I don't have an opposition to it. But I will tell you that now you're entering into a much more political arena, and it is frankly the 3 local financial experts, all of whom are friends of mine, but come with some baggage with the city administration and most particularly with the mayor. So I really hope we can keep these 2 separate. Let's do the spending affordability model effort. Let's get a contract with Towson and get that adjustment down to the city level. And then at the political level, which is me at the city council, be more than happy to talk about the Fells effort. And in fact, the council got a presentation about the Fells effort a long time ago. I think it went largely unnoticed, but that's the Fells is a group of graduate students, economic graduate students that do special projects, and they're done under a grant. And they've done, by all accounts, a lot of really valuable work and would give good insight. But I think that's separate from the spending affordability model that the state and the county use, and I would like the city to use.
Mhm. Well, that's fine with me. We can separate the two issues. I have no, concerns about that. But the spending affordability one has been around for 3 years, and it's something that we can get done. And quite frankly, it's only going to be as successful as the administration and the city council feel it would be a benefit. And I think you have all the right components in place for it. You have a director of finance that understands the concept from the county level, and could provide important input as to how to implement it on the city level. You need buy-in from the city council, that it would be of value. Obviously, it carries no requirement that its recommendations be adopted or followed. It doesn't on the county level, it wouldn't on the city level, but nonetheless, it does provide what Ellie asked for earlier in the meeting, and that is, we need to know the resources that we have to work with and what's possible when we go into any budget cycle. Okay, and that's what spending affordability will offer to it. If you want to advance a resolution in the city council, to get the buy-in that that the city pursue adopting a spending affordability function, that would be great. And from that resolution, we can work to put together a program here for the city and bring it back to the city council for them to, give their final blessing or adopt this. But I have no problem in separating the two issues.
The spending affordability requires a budget allocation. You make a contract with Towson, just like the state and the county do. And I can always introduce this at the audit committee for discussion. I think it is valuable information. I think it's valuable information to have as part of the union negotiation too. It tells you what your expected resource side of the equation is. The Fells is looking at duplication of efforts between city efforts and county efforts, and that is a much more delicate thing. I espouse that we do that, but I'm not sure that others on the policy making body, the council, do yet espouse that. And that again is work I'm more than happy to take up on the political side of things. But I do think they are very much should be kept separate. I don't think that the spending affordability model from Towson is political at all. But I think that the other could step on some toes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fine. I have no problem separating it, as I said earlier, Ross. Yeah. I do recognize in the spending affordability function that there would have to be some allocation of monies, but I do think that if we enter into a collaborative, relationship with the county, hopefully that could reduce the outlay somewhat.
I think so.
Make it more and make it more manageable. But all the pieces are in place here, for it if we want to go forward with it. But quite frankly, from my perspective, I think that I would need some indication, from the administration, which are represented by, the city manager and the director of finance, and from the city council, which you and Ellie are part of, that, yeah, hey, this makes sense. Let's go ahead and, give the fact, the thumbs up to, go ahead and make the necessary contacts and put together a program, that they can bring back to us and we can, and we can give a blessing to.
Bob, if I could make so bold, I've been waiting for you and Ed, the subcommittee, to make a formal recommendation to the fact, and the fact to recommend that we pursue the spending affordability model that is used by the state and the county. That's a whole separate category from getting into this other initiative. And I think that is a funding question once you make the recommendation, assuming that the council approves the funds to pursue the contract with Towson University.
Okay, very good. Well, we issued an initial report back about 24 months ago. We can go back to that, we can refine it. But what's key to that is that we need to make appropriate contacts within the county, to be able to, kind of, cross the T's and dot the I's as to what's possible on the collaborative effort end of it. And quite frankly, we do not want to, it would be inappropriate for us to initiate those contacts in the county without some indication that the city is endorsing this outreach. And we haven't had that full endorsement yet on that. I'm not going to reach out to the county executive and to the director of finance over there or to the head of the budget office and so forth and say, look, this is what we're thinking of doing in the city when, we're not certain, that, the city administration, the city council, is endorsing that outreach. Does that make sense? Do you understand where I'm coming from on that?
No, it does not. I think you're conflating two issues. The spending affordability model is an independent model. It's an independent product offered out of Towson University, and that's a straightforward contract. The beauty in doing that contract, which I can put in the budget request for this coming budget, is it's the same model that is used by the state and the county. And the step down to reflect the different weights of resources, we're much more heavily dependent upon property tax than the county and the state. That is just a modeling effort, and the 5 different modeling entities that are under this umbrella from Towson, but that's a straightforward contracting effort. The FELS, I think, does require some coordination and cooperation between the county and the city. And I think that that's really, again, the fact making a recommendation that we look at that is helpful, but it really is the city and the county that need to enter into those coordinations.
Okay. Let's put FELS aside. I'm just talking about spending affordability. Let's put FELS aside. Spending affordability, do you want a collaborative effort with the county on that, or do you want the city to go it alone on it?
I want both.
Okay, very good. Then we need to reach out to the county. No, wait a minute, Fred. We need to reach out to the county to explore what collaborative effort could exist just on spending affordability. Okay, and before we do that, we need to know that, we're doing this, with the administration and the city council's, backing that, we're exploring this opportunity.
I'll take that on from the council side of things, and having the contract with Towson, if that's what the procurement process yields, I'm not sure we can justify sole source, so we have to go through all of that. But for years, I've strongly advocated that we do the spending affordability function, which has to be created in code, and then support that with a contract. There's other entities that look at spending affordability. The work that you and Ed did showed us that. But the one that I personally favor is the one with Towson, but that has to go through, as I'm sure the city attorney will tell us, a legitimate procurement process. But it has to be budgeted first and foremost.
Okay, Ross, why don't you, Jody, and I and Ed talk offline and go further on this, okay? We've
Sounds
taken
like-
enough time, but I felt that we needed to get this out there.
Also needs
And
to
I
be
think that
voted.
it needs to be discussed with the other FAC members present now. This is, there's been some discussions going on, behind the scenes, but I think the other FAC members, need to be involved in this and, need to be engaged so that, there's full buy-in all the way around. Very good. Thank you for indulging me, Mr. Chair.
Jody, were you starting to say something?
Yeah, so I think there's been some kind of total miscommunication here. I have never been under the impression that there was a clear, succinct direction from the subcommittee that the FAC formed as far as spending affordability recommendations and things that we should do to move forward. We've been waiting for that. A couple years ago, you wanted authority to move to reach out to people, and you wanted something like a resolution from council or something, and we decided that wasn't the right way to go. And I thought that we had provided you what you wanted to with authority. Now, if I'm recalling that wrong, I'm sorry, but it was on my impression that we were still waiting for some conclusion from your subcommittee on what to do as far as spending affordability is concerned. Now, if there's other conversations taking place with other members of the administration about things, I'm out of the loop on that. And I think we should, when we talk about this offline, we need to include Mike Malinoff, because he's, I don't know where the impression is getting that we're stalling or not wanting this to take place. I think that the spending affordability issues that the group brings to the county are useful. I would appreciate those. I can reach out to Resi myself in Towson and get their help. I mean, I could have done that 2 or 3 years ago. So I have been waiting for specific, clear directions. I think there's some kind of miscommunication if you think we've been sitting on something you've recommended, because that is not my impression. But that's all I'm going to add. I think we're way over time, and I'll let the chairman take over now.
Thank you, Tony. All right, I think we've beaten that to death. So we up to Bob to arrange a communication between him and Mike and Jody and Meehan to talk about moving this spending affordability forward, and then we'll see where that goes. And Jody, you're right, we are way over our allotted time, but that having been said, I see that city attorney and human resources director are here with us. And I think because some commission members have requested that they be available to answer a few questions about pending ordinance O-2-23, that we take the time, hopefully not too much time, to allow you as commission members to pose the questions, have their input, and then we can move forward. So that having been said, thank you, Tricia. Thank you, Mike. Michael, for joining us. Appreciate it. And I'll open the floor to commission members for a question to either the city attorney or human resources director. So Bob, let me go to you first.
Mike and Tricia, thank you for coming in at this late hour here. Look, when we were discussing this ordinance, there were some comments made that reflected or attempted to reflect what the opinion of the Office of Law was and HR in reference to some of the language that's in this draft ordinance, and the meaning or concept of what good faith means paired with areas, certain language that's being struck from the ordinance and additional language that's being added to the ordinance. And more specifically, and I ask the other commission members to chime in if I get this wrong or misunderstood this, but more specifically, it was felt on page 3, beginning on line 26 of the draft ordinance, and I'm talking about the struck language here on paragraph D, that apparently this language that was in the ordinance did not comport with what would be considered good faith, if you will. That language in paragraph D sets a beginning time for negotiations and a point in time when negotiations should be concluded, an agreement reached so that it could be submitted in the mayor's proposed budget, and the opportunity exists for the city council to be able to weigh in with their thoughts and guidance on the collective bargaining agreements that were reached as they discuss the coming fiscal year budget and how to incorporate that agreement into the budget. So that's kind of a overview of the discussion that occurred, if you will. And I guess my question is that I'm uncertain how the city would not be acting in good faith if it required a certain start date and a certain end date, for negotiations between those two dates when negotiations would occur and agreement be reached to be able to meet the needs and the requirements of incorporating such agreement into the fiscal year budget in which that intended agreement would take effect.
So I'm not really sure what your question is. The ordinance is written, has been.
Well, let me clarify, Tricia, if I may.
Sure.
Okay. The issue is the paragraph D was struck because it was not considered to be in good faith to have a starting date and an ending date.
No.
That
that's
is
not-
at least what
that's
I
not the case.
understood is being portrayed to us. And that's why we wanted you, Michael, and you, Tricia, available to us to add clarity as to exactly, why it was felt by the Office of Law that paragraph D with a beginning and a concluding date for negotiations may, first of all, is being struck, or why it's being recommended to be struck.
Well, first of all, the paragraph is not struck in total. Paragraph D was reformatted, number one, because it was unclearly drafted. And it contained topics within that paragraph D that should likely be separated. As we did that reformatting, we found that this date of the agreement in D, the old D, the agreement must conform to the city's fiscal year or years and be submitted to the mayor by the third Monday of March. Well, what we did in the new B negotiation timeline said the same thing, but in a clearer way. Within 30 days after the mayor submits the proposed operating budget to the city council, another date as the committee deems appropriate, there should be a briefing, and the mayor's proposed budget shall include the projected financial impact of ongoing negotiations, which is essentially the same thing. What we found is that third Monday of March was not really attainable or fair year after budget, year after collective bargaining year, because you kept missing it, because as all parties do, there are circumstances that prevent everybody from meeting every week or every month throughout the process. And even the last couple of sessions that I've been involved in, the city has to partner with the unions, and we have to meet and bargain in good faith. What that means is if a bargaining unit cannot participate on a particular day or week, say the third Monday, before the third Monday of March, you got to budget your time so that you can meet. If that date slips, it doesn't mean that there's no good faith. It's better to say that from a good faith standpoint, that we will do our best to try to meet the target of providing the information in the mayor's budget, which is, I think, what they meant with the third Monday in March, because it was consistent with and contemporaneous with the submission of the mayor's budget, which is what we did when we reformatted B. So most of D is in B, just reformatted, and we took that end date out and made it consistent with the submission of the mayor's budget.
Okay, well, Michael, if you have a situation where the period of time for negotiation is not appropriate because it doesn't provide an opportunity for the collective bargaining units and the administration to find appropriate days to meet to negotiate, then why do away with the end date? Why don't you just have the start date a little bit sooner, okay, to create the time available to be able to reach agreement such that that agreement is on the table and ready at the time that the fiscal budget's being proposed, rather than have negotiations extend beyond, the time at which the mayor submits his, budget to, makes it public and submits it to the city council, for discussion. And
Right.
review.
The dates were input by the sponsor. We just drafted that in based on the information from the sponsor, and the sponsors, Alderwoman Tierney, Savage, and O'Neill.
Yeah.
So we don't decide that kind of language when we're
Okay.
drafting legislation.
And that's fine. And I'm just, I was under the impression that they were operating under the recommendations of the Office of Law and HR, but nonetheless.
Well, the
Even
start date, we have nothing to do with the start date, although we questioned whether or not a hard end date was a prudent way to structure it in a code. Given that if you couldn't meet by March 3rd, you would then be saying, or the third Monday in March, that the negotiations are over. And you can't say that, because that would indicate bad faith, especially when the other parties are trying to accommodate meeting schedules. And at this particular stage, we're accommodating three union collective bargaining,
Or,
four union collective bargaining agreements, and some subunits. So everybody can't meet, in the dates even that we set, for various reasons that have nothing to do with bad faith or people intentionally not wanting to meet. So we thought it better to make sure that the intent of the code was matched up with language that made it sound like we are meeting the needs of the code by putting the date of the collective bargaining consistent with the submission of the budget. To the extent that the mayor has information, it's going to go in the budget submission, but it could change through negotiations, of course. And for the last several times we've done these negotiations, we've never met that third Monday in March date.
Yeah, well, Mike, nobody's saying that negotiations are over come that Tuesday in March. Okay. What it is stipulating is that, look, if you want to include the agreement in the coming fiscal year's budget, if you want to implement the agreement in the coming fiscal year's budget, it has to conclude, we have to have that agreement by this specific date in March. But if negotiations carry on beyond March, okay, fine, you can negotiate, but the implementation of whatever's agreed to will have to wait until the next fiscal year.
yeah.
And in the meantime, we'd have to operate under the current agreement for the fiscal year budget that is currently before the city council.
And that is a sound option, we think, and is legally sufficient, but that's not the option the sponsors chose.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, that answers then one concern I had, because I just wanted to know where, the City of Law and HR was on this, but apparently, as I understand it, Mike, is that from the City of Law's perspective, is that what I suggested could be a viable alternative, to put into the code then, without breaching the concept of good faith.
So I
Yeah.
don't fully embrace that. I just want to make that clear from a standpoint of appropriate labor negotiations and good faith bargaining. The sponsors of this legislation were attempting to make sure that the city's budget around collective bargaining was appropriated in the mayor's budget. And I think it did a good job. It's well written in that regard. What we have run into, though, is that negotiations are done when negotiations are done, meaning that good faith bargaining includes both parties continue to meet until you get agreement. I think your concerns are very well taken, and I feel that the sponsors have considered that as well, which is to make sure that there's an appropriation based on where we are in bargaining for the impact, the financial impact of what we have brought to the table. Yes, the meeting schedule is challenging, but it's not so much that as that you have members of bargaining teams, that are trying to reveal financial information along the way and make decisions based on the city's ability to meet the economic expectations of the bargaining units. And it's a give and take. It's a give and take until it's done. But what you don't want to do is say that I'm not going to honor what the parties come to agreement on if you don't do it by a certain date, because I think then we're probably, without bringing our labor expert into this conversation, I believe what you're going to find is that really would create a situation where there could be a charge of not bargaining in good faith from a labor law standpoint. And what we want to make sure we're doing is being good stewards of the city's money when we sit down and bargain. And so with that, there's a lot of transparency. There's a lot of financial information that is shared. And then there's the economics that are brought to the table, meaning what the bargaining unit wants, and then the city's position. So when you're starting in November, when you're starting in the fall, you're really mostly starting with what are your non-economics, because you're not going to get the financial data that the bargaining unit members are expecting. The leadership team of the collective bargaining units efforts, you're not going to get that in the fall. That's going to be information that's coming. It'd be projection only, and maybe not necessarily what they're going to rely on till they know what you have to work with. And so from the perspective from my perspective in terms of labor negotiating style and practicality, you have to make sure you're sitting down in a very condensed time period and working through those very quickly. And so there's good faith effort. It's not an attempt not to meet those goals, but it's the practicality, the logical outcome of not meeting those goals that you want to make sure the crafting of your law supports that, allows for that, but still holds some measure of accountability around the city's finances.
Yeah, but Tricia, one thing that, this process that we've been engaged in and what the changes in code are advocating, though, we've talked all along about the importance of confidentiality in the negotiation process. Okay. Bargaining units want confidentiality. The administration wants confidentiality. Yet in the process we're engaged now, where we go over this deadline or this end date of March, and what is being advocated now in the new ordinance, it's requiring the city to publicly convey their negotiating position in the fiscal year budget that's being proposed.
Not in the detail that it's about the economics of bargaining. It is set aside money for the funding of the possible economic impact. It is not that level of detail.
Well, but nonetheless, it gives the collective bargaining units an advantage, though, over the city, because the city does have to publicly convey what its maybe 30,000 foot level position, would be. which I think would have breached, which would not be good faith in the sense that the city's hand is being forced to convey in a public forum, what possibly might be acceptable to them, without having the advantage of those negotiations play out completely. Because a fiscal year budget has to be put out to the public by a date specific, required by ordinance. And the city council has to be able to engage in that budget proposed by the administration, which would have to include, what the city's potential position may end up having to be, or what they're willing to do, even prior to the collective bargaining process being completed. And when the city budget over 70 or more % of the city expenses involve labor and benefits, that to me puts the city in a disadvantageous position. And it kind of puts the weight, it kind of weights it to the benefit of the collective bargaining units when you're trying to create an equal balance where both parties are trying to come to a mutually beneficial agreement on behalf of both, rather than have it heavily weighted in favor of one or the other.
Well, I wish I could give you a more direct window into what we do at the table and how much time is spent already in flushing out economics. I feel like there's some assumptions you're making around where we might be in the process by the time the budget is submitted. And so, both parties put together their wish list. And first of all, you're figuring out your rules of engagement, making sure that everybody's on board with that. But everybody needs to initially come to the table with what their expectations are. And I guarantee you, first it's going to be revelation of non-economics before you get into the economic discussions based on the information provided about the state of the city, financial state of the city. And I hear what you're saying, but there's also built into this an element of sharing that also requires a great deal of confidentiality and non-public expression. And again, there's a difference between setting aside a pot of money and giving away that pot of money. It's the temperature check of where you are in collective bargaining, so that you are doing a very decent costing of what it is that both parties are bringing to the table.
And that occurs in a confidential negotiation process.
Absolutely.
Without any aspect of it in any form or shape getting into the public domain. And I think that's where my concern is coming from, is that the process that exists now requires the administration to submit a budget by its time specific prior to negotiations being concluded, which then requires the city to have to in some manner, shape, or form, at whatever level, in a public forum, having to convey what they're capable or willing to do when it comes to
but I think,
a large percentage of the budget.
Bob, I would also say that part of my concern in what you said is if you're not done by a certain period of time, that you won't get the economic benefit from negotiations until the following fiscal year.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that would really get us into a great deal of difficulty around good faith bargaining if we legislated that they would not see the benefits of those negotiations until the year after they had engaged in collective bargaining for the coming fiscal year.
Well, the concept of good faith, exists around the structure, of the bargaining process. Okay, good faith, we all know that we have to start coming to the table by a date specific. Good faith, we all understand that we need to reach agreement by a certain date if we want to get this included in the fiscal year budget that you want the agreement implemented. Okay, we're operating in good faith, understanding that these are the parameters that we're working within. And we're operating in good faith. We understand that if we can't meet those parameters, that the process can continue, but in good faith, we all recognize that it cannot be implemented until the following fiscal year, because we are already in the budget process now.
Yeah.
And we do have a definite code-specific requirement that the budget be adopted by a date specific. And that's tough to do that if we don't have, 70 or plus percentage of our expenses, determined, by the collective bargaining process.
Yeah, I
We're all
don't know that
operating
we,
in good faith. We're all operating in good faith if we understand those parameters.
I don't feel comfortable making a qualitative, having a qualitative reaction to that without consultation with a labor negotiator that we engage in that has a great deal more experience around the implications of such a decision.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you, Tricia.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. And I understand from your perspective, Michael, that, the legal possibilities are there. It's just a question of whether, it's an HR issue of concern, that has to be addressed.
It's a council issue. The council has the authority and the power to do a lot of things. Good faith presumes that whatever the rules of the road are, that they're published and everybody knows what they're dealing with. And the code expresses that. The fact that you had a Monday, 3rd of March expressed a council intent that negotiation ended us on a certain date, which they can do. The question is whether or not that's something you want to stick to. But if you want to have a date that moves the benefit of negotiation that may extend after the budget, the council can clearly pass legislation that moves the benefits of those negotiations into the new year if they decide to do that. It just has to, that's part of good faith, and then everybody has an opportunity to have public hearings and deal with the law passing. That's just a situation with respect to legislation that puts us in a position of being able to do various things. But with respect to moving it willy-nilly or without notice, that's problematic, definitely.
Okay. Now, the second part, Michael, that, to be addressed, and this deals with the confidentiality aspect of it, okay? You come into a collective bargaining negotiation situation. The collective bargaining units determine who their negotiating team is, and the city determines who their negotiating team is. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And
you bring in the appropriate subject matter experts, whether they be attorneys or whatever.
The council has designated the city manager as the chief negotiator for the city.
Okay.
Through the code.
Yeah, fine. Okay, good. Okay, but nonetheless, each participant in the collective bargaining negotiation process chooses their team, and that team then is sworn to confidentiality or whatever.
Those are our rules of conduct.
Okay, very good.
Yeah. Mhm.
So the city has, when the city chooses its negotiating team with the city manager as the lead negotiator, okay, the composition of that team, can be what the city manager, chooses to be, correct? Okay.
Yes.
So this goes to the second point of our concern, is to what level, would and should members of the Financial Advisory Commission be engaged, as well as members of the City Council should be engaged. For instance, is there any reason that would prevent the city manager when he puts together, or she puts together, the negotiating team for the city to include a representative or two from the city council and a representative or two from the Financial Advisory Commission, who are obligated to confidentiality in their role in participating in the collective bargaining process. Is there anything that prevents the city manager in putting together her or his team from including representatives from the city council and the fact on that team, providing they comport to the confidentiality, aspects of that process?
With respect to the council, the code delineates the authority of the executive branch governing contracts and contract negotiations. The council is not included in that list of duties and functions as a legislative body, particularly because of the potential for litigation or arbitration over any of the provisions. You don't want your legislative bodies involved with that litigation. So
Understand.
the council, no. The fact, that's probably more of a gray area that we could take up offline or maybe research, but that's maybe the prerogative of the administration, but I'm not so sure about that. The code doesn't specify or prohibit directly or expressly with respect to the fact.
Okay, Michael, when I refer to a representative of the city council, I'm talking about one or two representatives, which do not make a quorum of the city council. So it's not acting as a legislative body participating in a collective bargaining process. You have one or two representatives from the city council who themselves have no authority to operate as a legislative body, who are participating on a negotiating team. Okay, so how does that play into it? Because they're not acting, two city council members cannot operate as a legislative body.
That's not the line of demarcation. The line of demarcation is clearly set out in the code with respect to what council duties are and the council's authority and the council's charge. It does not include intervening, being a part of, participating in, attending contract negotiations, contract execution, contract modification, contract administration. That is technically within the purview of the administration. And in our hybrid system, that includes the mayor and city manager.
Okay.
And to the extent that the mayor is a member of the council, the mayor generally doesn't participate in these things, but if he did, I think there would be authority under the code for him to do so, but or the mayor to do so. But as far as I know, the mayor generally doesn't participate and have anything to do except at signing, which is part of the authority under the code to execute contracts. And then his staff and administration administers the contract once it's signed.
Okay, so from our discussion, what I understand that it is possible that the city manager can, when putting together the negotiating team, can potentially include one or two representatives on the fact as part of that negotiating team, providing they adhere to the confidentiality requirements.
Well, one, it's unclear. I'd have to do more research. And two, I don't think confidentiality or lack of confidentiality is the issue. It's whether or not there's an authority or prohibition set forth in the code based on your function. And I'd have to do more research about that.
Okay, well, then part two would be that the city council, wait a minute, just a second, Fred. Then what you're indicating is the city council, does have, as a legislative body, does have the ability to amend the code to make such provisions.
I would say no, they don't have the ability to amend the charter to give legislators, which technically at a constitutional level, U.S. Constitution, which flows down to states and municipalities with the 14th Amendment, a separation of powers, a distinctiveness between the legislative and executive functions. That interplay is one that's fraught with, problems if not done correctly. The current code and charter have done it for the most part correctly. To intercede in that and to interrupt that distinctive duty under the charter would be fraught with issues or traps for the unwary, in my view.
Okay, very good. So here, we were initially talking about code. Now we bring in the charter. I look at the two as being, the charter itself requires a whole nother process for amending and so forth versus the code. Okay, so what you seem to be indicating is that the charter the charter does present some restrictions as to what's possible and isn't possible short of amending the charter, which is a lot more complicated than amending the code. And the city code, obviously, to an extent, has to comport with the charter of the city. So I understand where you're coming from there. But nonetheless, I think that, one question, which you have answered partially, and I understand that you need to do a little bit more research on it, is that it is possible for one or two members of the Financial Advisory Commission to be selected as part of the administration's negotiating team when it comes to, negotiating with the collective bargaining units.
Yeah, I think right now, the way that the code expresses the Financial Advisory Commission duties, the duties of the commission are to advise the mayor and alderpersons on financial matters affecting the city. That's the code provision. So that advice could come in a lot of different ways, but without me doing more in-depth research, I don't know if there's any other provisions that are, if they're conflicting, would present a problem with respect to that choice.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate, the give and take, and I do very much appreciate your counsel.
Appreciate
And yours as well, Tricia.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate you digging into this. Do I see a hand up from Madeline?
Yes, hi. I just wanted to remind you that we're now currently an hour over the scheduled time of the meeting. And I don't know if anyone else on the call has commitments, but I have one at 11. So if there's any other agenda items that are really pressing, might I recommend that we address them now?
Okay, well, I think we're almost finished, Madeline, but thank you for bringing that to our attention. Anybody else have anything they need to bring up today? Our next meeting is April 13th at 8 a.m. We thought the next regularly scheduled meeting. We'll let you know if we need to have a special meeting, deal with budget issues before then, or for anything else. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order? If not, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Bob Burden, seconded by
Second.
Ken Dog. Discussion, hearing none, all in favor of adjourning, signify by saying aye, or raise your right hand.
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Healthy, robust discussion today, and